Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered How to Edit Seals, Part 15. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
This morning, she hadn't bothered to close the curtains, so her room was dark. She probably would have felt better if she had gotten up from her bed and let the light in. It would have helped her clear her mind and stop her shaky thoughts from going over and over in her head. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. She didn't know much, or more accurately, she hadn't been told much, but what she did know gave her a good idea of what had happened. Few outsiders knew the wolves as well as she did, and there was no way to keep the clan from hearing that they had been to the compound last night. What was hard to accept was that the person who seemed to be the target was the only person she thought knew those wolves as well as she did. Yamanaka Inoichi was taken to the Konoha Hospital's emergency care ward. There was no way that the two things had nothing to do with each other, it was impossible. She found that when the wolves were involved, there was no such thing as luck. She still didn't know why the wolves had gone after her father, though. As far as she knew, they were no longer fighting, which could only mean that she didn't know something. Logic told her that it shouldn't be a surprise, but the same logic told her that something had to happen, and the wolves hadn't shown any more interest in her clan. So, they told her that her father had done something she didn't know about to make them angry again. And that explains why he was acting the way he was. She hit one of her pillows with a mean face. Just when things were starting to get better, he ended up throwing away everything they had done. A small part of her wondered if this was how he felt when she got Naruto to declare a feud between himself and the clan when her father was trying to stop her clan members from going after the boy. She thought she understood that a little bit better, but she couldn't think of any reason why he would want to make the wolves angry. She sighed and threw herself on the bed, letting her feet hang over the hard wooden floors. She really needed answers if she was going to be able to clear things up and make the wolves calm down if they were still upset. Unfortunately, it looked like she would have to wait until her father got home to get them. That was, of course, if he was ever going to come back home. Good news, was the first thing she said as she slammed the front door of her apartment to let herself in. Naruto looked at the smiling Tokubetsu Junin as a wolf closed the door out of the corner of his eye. He raised one eyebrow and asked what kind of news would make her act like that. She rubbed the back of her head with a sheepish grin, like a child who got in trouble but didn't think they did anything wrong except get caught. But that wasn't really an answer, so he asked again, this time out loud. And, Anko, what's the good news? With a triumphant half jump, she raised one arm high into the air, revealing the scroll inside. I got us a mission, and it's a good one. Her smile went from shy to excited as she looked at him expectantly, like an attention-hungry pet, waiting for a yes. His brow, which had gone back to its normal position, just went back up again as a silent signal to explain. He didn't know if she understood that or had decided to keep going on her own, but he didn't ask her either. At the end of the day, what matters is that it was done. You know, I've been trying to get bandit killing missions for a long time, but until now, someone else has always gotten there first. It's not surprising, really, since that was the most popular type of mission for shinobi of any rank. Go there and kill everything, was about as clear as it could get. Not this time. I camped out on the roof of the Hokage Tower, so when the missions were given out, I dropped down and took one. She seemed very happy with herself, which made him smile in a funny way. He knew she could be serious, but she acted like a child so much that it was sometimes hard to see her as anything else. When he didn't say anything when she told him something good, like now. Okay then, he said as he saw her smile return. Have fun. The pout was back, and it was bigger than ever. Oh, it was so much fun to play with her. Hey, don't be so mean, Naruto-kun. It was almost a whine, but Naruto-kun's voice was so soft and upset that it was almost cute. At least, they are cute in a kunoichi way. What do you mean? He really should have tried to get her to wear something else, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. With a huff, she crossed her arms over her prominently displayed chest and gave him a look that was somewhere between innocent pleading and coercive glaring. Again, he could almost call it cute, but only in a way that only Anko could. You understand what I mean, you should come with me. Am I? She said, yes, and stomped her foot like a toddler throwing a fit. Come and kill things with me. Fine, he said, I'll go on the mission with you. He waited until she did a happy dance before continuing. But you're not trying to forget your tent and sleep with me, are you? She stopped and went from being a child to a woman right away. Or, even better, from a child to a grown-up kunoichi. Oh, for sure, she said as she licked her lips and gave him a naughty smile. But that's the same for every mission. The killing is what makes it special. Who knows? Maybe I'll need your help washing away all the blood when we're done. She gave him a wink and then turned and almost skipped out of the apartment, slamming the door again as she crossed the threshold. Maybe she just went from being a child to being Anko. Or say, Anko to Anko. Yes, that did work out pretty well, didn't it? Anko was always Anko, and that was something that couldn't be changed. When another smile pulled at his lips, he let it spread out over them. This would be a lot of fun. As he walked toward the kitchen, his smile turned into a frown. His food for missions used to be kept in there, but now there were also pieces of inoichi. Before the mission, he would have to get more. He probably bought a new refrigerator while he was at it. It rolled in dangerous circles, getting closer and closer to the end where, if left alone, it would fall to the wooden floor and spill its red contents with a tinkle of breaking glass. She carefully picked it up. It was cold against her pale, shaking fingers. Putting it on her bed made it much less likely that it would break, which was good for now. It was good, but she didn't know what to do with it at first. For what reason had she, Hyuga Hinata, been given Yamanaka Inoichi's blood? The wolves seemed happy that she got it, but she didn't know why. She didn't know what she wanted to do with it or, more importantly, what she was supposed to do with it. She was sure that she wouldn't have gotten it without a good reason. Now, she just had to figure out what it was. I'm glad nothing bad happened to it. Her first thought was to ask Naruto, so that's what she did. Surely, no one else would know more about the delivery of the vial than he does, right? She knew that Naruto was also very busy, and she didn't want to bother him over a simple vial of blood. Was it easy, though? Was there a deeper meaning or a symbol she didn't get? If she insulted him or his wolves, he might leave her alone again. It was too awful to think about, and that made her even more determined to do something about this very strange gift. She couldn't think of anything else it could be. If she remembered right, if she couldn't find Naruto, she might be able to find his assistant, Mai. She could ask Naruto when he was free what it was for, even if she didn't know. So, Hinata could at least get the information she needed in the end. She also didn't know how to find the girl, so that didn't help her much either. A letter was always a possibility. It could be sent now and answered when he had time, but she didn't know when that would be. Would it really be okay for her to possibly put off doing what she was supposed to do? She had nothing else to do, so she sat down at her desk and started writing. She wrote about everything except the biggest question on her mind. What had happened to Inoichi if the wolves had given her his blood? The last sound he would hear would be the clanking of chains as they quickly jerked around him to break his neck and destroy his spine. Even if he hadn't died right away, he would have been completely safe. Naruto was nearby, perched on a short tree and surrounded by bushes that were tall enough to cover most of his crouching position. He watched without emotion as his chains pulled the body away and into the nearby bushes at the bottom of the hill after he gave them one command. These idiots must have thought that putting their base in the middle of a valley in the northwest of the country would protect them in some way. He almost felt bad for anyone who thought it was an advantage that not just one but both of the hills in the valley were covered in thick trees. He was making good use of the foliage. With a finger to his ear, he turned on his short-range microphone, which made a crackling noise. He said, "Southeastern sentries are clear. You're free to start when you're ready, Lust." "Okay, Wrath, I get it. I'll start the distraction now." The explosions were loud enough to be heard, but the bright flashes of light they made in the early evening were impossible to miss. That was, of course, the whole point. It wouldn't do much damage other than maybe start a fire, but the bandits would be able to put out a fire with their numbers. It wouldn't help them, though, because if they were all busy putting out fires in their camp, they wouldn't notice that death was coming. A big fire would hurt them just as much as it hurt the bandits, but the idea of just setting it all on fire and waiting for it to go out was tempting. They didn't go that way because they would have had to stay up all night guarding the smoldering remains of the wooden fort until it was light enough to search by and the fire had died down enough for them to sort through it. They just wanted to sleep, damn it, even if it meant killing everyone by hand. It also gave the bandits the chance to keep any stolen goods they had when they were hurt. Even though neither of them had any plans to give them back, it did mean that their pay for this mission could be a lot more than what they had been told. Now, did anyone else have to know? Two fingers were held up in the air. clearly separated to show the number, and then brought back together and flicked forward no less than 3 times. 2 of the 3 wolves behind him responded right away by moving toward the fort. The third and last wolf, who was also the only female in the group, moved closer to her master, almost like she was going to use her body as a shield for the next part of the operation. From what Wrath could see, it seemed pretty likely. Still, he had nothing against what was going on, so he didn't say anything. She was to stay as his guard, because they really couldn't leave him without one for any reason, and if that's how she did her job, so be it. As the other 2 went by, 2 chains came out of his body and wrapped around their arms. His view was great for the sentries, but he couldn't see what was going on behind the wooden camp. His wolves would look out for him. As he waited in the dark, he listened to the silence for a long time. With sharp eyes, he watched the wolves' tiny movements. Only because he knew they were there could he see them winding down the hill through bushes and trees to get to the clearing, which he didn't think was big enough. It was possible that the bandits here wanted their new fort to look as much like the rest of the area as possible. Either they hadn't finished yet, which was likely, or they'd done a terrible job, which was also likely. Either way, he had to shake his head at the way they'd set things up. They stood out like a sore thumb, and it was only their hideout which he didn't think was necessary, but he liked to protect his own buildings by having the wolves hide in the ground or, better yet, in a cave in the side of a mountain that kept him from getting rid of them without going into their newest base. He thought that it would also stop an archer, and if it was done on purpose, he applauded them. He thought, though, that it was probably just luck, in which case he could only shake his head and laugh at the fact that it was almost gone. Still, if they had set it on fire, it would have been a great trap because no one would have been able to get out. Too bad that choice couldn't be used. He was pulled out of his thoughts when he felt chakra pulse in one of the chains. In response, he pumped chakra into his own chain and lengthened it until he felt both the tiny chakra in his target and the physical impact of his chains. They no longer had to worry about one more possible danger. With half a thought, the chakra was pulled off the chain and retracted until a second pulse of foreign chakra showed that it was the right length for his wolf to control. Not long after, the other chain got a pulse, and he lengthened it just like he had done with the first. Again and again, they killed the bandits one by one as they got rid of the few guards who had stayed at their posts even though lust was distracting them. It was almost a good thing. Yes, they were stupid, but it didn't matter what they did because they were all going to die anyway. It took almost 10 minutes for his wolves to get to where the rest of the bandits were, and then another 3 minutes for them to move the chains into the right places to attack. Pulses of chakra told him where to hold the chains, where to make more, and finally, when he could start. They had no chance of winning. In a huge wave of abyssal chains, most of them were either torn to pieces or pinned to the soft ground and left to slowly die. Those who had gotten away were soon caught by a lot of snakes and a dancing kunoichi with a kunai that he twirled. He heard a crackle of static, and then a wolf whispered that the base was clear, but he could still hear screams. Lust was still messing around with her food, it seems. He had full faith in his wolves and their skills, so he just gave a single nod to his sentry and the 2 of them started moving down the hill much faster than the wolves had. Now that there was no longer a threat, they didn't have to move as quietly as before. Also, getting around the fort didn't take long because it had already been cleared and all he had to do was follow his chains. The scene he saw was, to be honest, pretty much what he had been expecting. Lust, who had just finished her own follow-up attack, was covered in blood. She was happy to work on causing as much pain as she could to one of the bandits who had been chained to the soft, quickly turning red earth with Aben chains. It looked like the poor fool was only held down by his leg, which made him a great choice for her plaything tonight. In this situation, Wrath could say without a doubt that he really felt bad for the poor man. He had no desire at all to be subjected to her less than kind treatment. At least, when things are like this. When she heard his plan, she looked up from her work with a big smile. He didn't know if it was because of being able to kill and torture bandits or because of seeing him. He did know, though, that she soon pressed herself against him hard and hugged him as hard as she could. He thought about how his clothes would be covered in blood, even though he had been far from the actual battle. Considering who he had gone on the mission with, he really should have expected that. "See, I told you this would be fun." She still wouldn't let him go, but she smiled at him and loosened her grip just enough to let him go. "Yes, of course, it's a lot of fun," he said, although he didn't seem too excited about the whole thing. It was his job, and even though he liked how simple it was, he didn't enjoy killing strangers very much. If he knew them, especially because they had hurt him or his kids, things would be different. Ah, Naruto-kun, you don't sound too happy, he said. He could hear and see her pout, and the fact that she was covered in blood made it even stranger. This is more your thing, Anko, and now you've gotten blood all over me. Nope, not Anko, she told him as she took one of his arms away and shook her finger in his face. I'm Lust, remember? You just called me by my real name, so this can't be about keeping to the code names. He didn't know why he let her choose them. It's Lust. If you want me to invite you to come with me, she said with a smirk on her face and a playful look in her eyes. He decided to bite with a sigh. Invite me to do what? Nope, you said it wrong. Try saying, invite me to what, Lust-chan. He gave her a dry look and sighed, but he eventually decided to be nice to her. Invite me to do what, Lust-chan? Her grin turned into a saucy smirk. Why, of course to help me wash the blood off. It didn't take him long to figure it out, and once he did, it didn't seem like such a big deal. Not with that kind of reward, at least. It was pretty clear that something had changed. Before, the wolves treated her with respect because of her position. After all, their lord had chosen Hera, but now, it seemed like they were treating her like she was one of them. He might have been a better wolf, but he was still a wolf, and that was a big difference that was hard to miss. In all honesty, this kind of acceptance had come as a surprise, but that didn't mean it was a bad thing. On the contrary, she liked how the people she worked with seemed more at ease when she was around. Their actions reminded her more of her own pack, which made her feel more at home in Nami no Kuni. She didn't think she'd ever want to leave at this rate. She might not have, either. Naruto thought that what had happened to Ino's father was really terrible, and the fact that she knew who did it made it even worse. The Yamanaka had been attacked again by the wolves, a group that her brother was part of. This time, it was much worse than before. Just thinking about it gave her chills and made her feel like she might not eat again. Arms cut off at the shoulder, legs cut off at the knee with all the skill of a sledgehammer, and what she thought was the worst, his tongue was cut right out of his mouth. Ino had told the wolves about her suspicions that her father might have started the fight, since that was usually how things went when the Yamanaka and the wolves fought. But even if he had, what could he have done to get such a strong reaction? This wasn't the same as dragging their name through the mud, because their name could still be saved. No, this was as long-lasting as death. If Ino's theories are true, he may have been saved from death just to make him suffer longer by making him live the rest of his life in such a mangled state. It was cruel and ruthless, and it was exactly the kind of thing she could see the wolves doing to get their point across. But it wasn't something she could picture her beloved brother doing. But she was starting to think that maybe she didn't know him as well as she thought she did, at least not anymore. At one point, she was sure she knew everything there was to know about him. But after 4 years apart, he had changed, and maybe she had changed too, so she couldn't really say she knew him anymore. But she would have to fix that. It might not be easy, since their mother was trying to bring him back into the clan and they never got to talk to each other, but it was possible. Like the drop in Yamanaka's reputation, the change was only temporary and could be fixed. But if she gave up, even if she tried again later, she would never be able to forgive herself. And that was for good. His eyes moved from the stack, no, mountain, of papers back to his father. Even though he looked at the wide path once, twice, and 3 more times, he still couldn't figure out what was going on.
You want me to do what? The disbelief was so strong that it filled the office and gave his father a feeling of relief he hadn't had in a long time. That's exactly what I said, my boy, he said. His eyes were probably twinkling with laughter, and a smile tugged at his lips as he smoked his trusty wooden pipe. We need to teach you what a Hokage does so that we can train you well for the job of Hokage candidate.
So that means I'm supposed to do your paperwork? Surely this was a joke, right? Don't think of it as mine, Hiruzen told him. Think of it as the work of your future self. You don't mind helping yourself out now, do you? Sarutobi Asuma couldn't believe it, or rather, he could believe it, he just didn't want to. His father couldn't possibly think that that was a good argument for anything. Well, maybe when he was talking to his nephew Konohamaru about something, but even then, the kid might have known something was wrong. But him? One of the 12 guardians and a shinobi with a higher rank and a big reward on his head? He couldn't be expected to agree with that. The way he looked at his father told his father this. Now, Asuma, don't give me that look. This is the best way to prepare you to be Hokage. But I don't even want to be the Hokage, Hiruzen just grinned. Of course you do, my boy, of course you do, and this is the first step. Now, get to it. With that, he turned away from his son and the huge pile of paperwork he had been putting off and left his office, taking both of them and his worries with him. Asuma didn't know how to explain how free that action was. At least not yet, but he would eventually. But for now, all the younger Sarutobi knew was that his father was having way too much fun with this Hokage candidate thing. When I looked at the stack of papers again, had it grown? He did the only thing he could do. He took the best line from the student who was his favorite. Troublesome. Something came up, so we can't do the deal. The normally calm man, who was almost completely covered, raised his brow in silence. Even though it was quiet, he had to say it again in a way that made it clear what he meant. Off. Wasn't this your plan? What could have stopped you if you were so set on doing this that you gathered an army? Other plans, different chances. Konoha can wait, it's made it this far, it can make it a little longer. Konoha, maybe, but the sand won't be able to keep going like this for much longer. We need Konoha out of the way if we want to make it through even the next 5 years. I can't wait until it's easier for you. There are other ways to make sure your future is safe. Cage Dono. The invasion was just the simplest. You talk about them, but I don't know who they are. What can I do to help my people now? We have nothing of value to trade, no strength to lend, and a daimyo who would be happy to let us all starve to death so he could save a few 100,000 yen over the course of the year, even though we're the ones who feed him. Ah, but you know me, they said with a smile that couldn't be seen because, like the cage, they had their face covered. I like you and your people, probably because you were willing to go to war with me and my forces against a major power, but I think that's enough reason to help you out, no? He made his eyes narrow, but he didn't say anything against the idea. Taking this as a sign to keep going, the other person did so. Recently, an opportunity came up because I was able to get in touch with someone from my past to my godson, to be exact. Even though he was covered, the cage's body language showed he was surprised, which was noted with great amusement. Recently, he's been doing pretty well for himself. In fact, he's doing so well that he has power in a wave that's growing quickly in close ties to the House of Wolves of the Imperial Fire Court. When the cage found out that Orochimaru had a godson and was in touch with them, he didn't think he could be more shocked. He was, of course, very, very wrong. He has ties to a house of the Imperial Fire Court. This was more important than having power in Konoha, because if Hai no Kuni wanted to say something, his own daimyo would gladly listen. A few whispered words going up the vine and across the desert could have helped his village get out of this mess. Was that enough? Most likely not, but it might get things going, which was more than he had dared to hope for before. That's right, he does. From what I know, he has close ties. Another hidden smile formed, this one even wider than the first. After all, he managed to get permission for me to build an outpost near the village of Wave. Really? If he could get them an outpost, they could make their lives better by spreading the word about the great jewelry their craftsmen made in a much easier way. If there was enough time, that would help everyone in the village. Orochimaru nodded. The wolves are very territorial, but they didn't question his word when he told them to accept my troops. Che, of course they did, he was their lord. If they hadn't, if not by Naruto then by Orochimaru, they would have been killed for going against him. No one could hurt her godson without hurting her, and she was not forgiving. Then maybe that really is an option. I'll need you to set up a meeting for us, said the cage, whose frown Orochimaru could almost feel. The council, on the other hand, will be tougher to persuade. Orochimaru gave a shrug. Stand down or die. If they attack Konoha, they will be invading the territory of the wolves and will be torn to pieces. If they get away, I will hunt them down and bring them to my godson's feet. The cage felt his skin crawl when he heard those words, because they showed real devotion. It was wrong to even think about an Orochimaru who was motivated in any way by feelings for someone else. He couldn't find the words to describe how he felt. Orochimaru was scary enough on his own, but when he was driven, it meant that their godson had the power to throw the whole world into darkness and chaos at will. Just the thought of it would keep him up for weeks. And when he was finally able to fall asleep, it would keep him up at night. One of his eyes crinkled up in a smile as he looked down at his students. As usual, the other eye was hidden behind his headband. 3 stacks of paper were tightly held in one hand, waiting for his team to fill them out so they could get into an event that could be very good for their new shinobi of the Leaf careers. Just because of that, he wasn't sure if he really wanted them to come in. Not because he was worried about their safety or didn't want his team to leave him, which were both things he really wanted to happen, but because he thought it could help them. That was if you turned your head funny, but it could be helpful, and Kakashi hated his genin team very much. That's why it was so hard for him to decide if he really wanted to give them such a chance. In the end, though, it was still a deadly tournament that could get rid of them as his responsibility and maybe even kill them. Even if they didn't win, though, they would be tortured by their loss. That was the last thought that made the final difference. Having them take part, struggle, and overcome problems, and then letting them fail. It was so delicious to think about how sad and bad they felt about themselves. Let it be known that Hitaki Kakashi was a mean motherfucker. Of course, most of the time, his friends thought that was a good thing. After all, they were shinobi. But that was a different problem. Right now, he had to give them the papers, maybe tease them a little, and then prepare for the first task by putting them out of his mind for 2 weeks. In other words, he was able to take a 2-week break while his students prepared to face a challenge that could end their careers and lives. Oh, he was going to have some good dreams after that. He'd be happy to take more naps to get to those dreams. The Hokage had said it before, but Kakashi had it pretty good. Alright, my little failures, I have a present for you all. They had been working for Kakashi for a while, so they were used to his insults, but his happy voice told them that this probably wouldn't be fun for them. What? It wasn't much more than a grunt, but the team had plenty of time to learn Sasuke's secret language. But to be fair, this grunt was very close to being the word itself. These. He held the papers in his hands like a bouquet and said, these. 3 of his students just looked at him blankly. When she didn't get any more details, Naruto crossed her arms over her chest and cocked her hip to ask a simple question. What? Kakashi seemed to lose some of his excitement when he was asked the same question over and over again. This made everyone even more suspicious. If Kakashi could be in a playful mood, then it wasn't going to be good for them. Why? Forms for the Chunin exams, of course. This got their attention. For a moment, the 3 of them felt their hearts getting excited, but it went away just as quickly as they gave him suspicious looks. Sakura was the one who asked some of the questions. She asked, "Why exactly do you want us to take these tests? You haven't had us for a year yet, and all you've done is give us half-assed teamwork exercises and teach us how to control our chakras so you can watch us repeatedly fall out of trees. Now, I just have that much faith in the skills you already have," he told them. They looked at him like he was crazy, but even Sasuke didn't think he was ready to go up against people who had been trained by Junin with the knowledge he had gained at the academy. He said, "Sasuke has the Sharingan and a lot of fire techniques. And Naruto has her chains, which are powered by huge amounts of chakra that are many times bigger than those of people much older than her. And me? What do I have, Kakashi-sensei?" This was asked by Sakura, of course. "You." Well, Kakashi scratched his head for a moment before looking around for a quick answer, which didn't exactly make the young Kunoichi feel confident. "Ah, of course you have Sasuke and Naruto." For that, he got 3 more blank looks. 2 of them didn't want to be in a dangerous exam with someone who couldn't hold their own weight, and the other didn't want to have to depend on the other 2 during a 3-part challenge that could take her life. Kakashi, on the other hand, really didn't care. Well, then, have fun. He threw the papers at them and disappeared in a swirl of leaves, which happened to catch the papers as well. Team 7 couldn't decide if it was worth the trouble of the exams to go after the papers that were running away. In the end, though, they did find them, and each member took one to keep safe. To be safe. Kakashi laughed as he hid in nearby trees and focused half of his attention on his favorite porn. Some of his students might be leaving him soon, one way or another. He was impatient. He should have been mad, upset, sad, miserable, or anything else, but he wasn't. No, that wasn't exactly right. If he had to say something, it would be that he was tired. "I'm so tired that my bones hurt and my soul hurts." But he had gotten over the strange weariness that had spread through his whole body and accepted his fate, which he had, to be honest, brought on himself. He had accepted it when the decision was made, so he didn't feel anything about his situation now. Nothing, but maybe just a little bit of gratitude. Many people would see his future as a long-term punishment from someone who was too cruel to kill his enemy, but he was glad to have the chance to stay with his family. His family was the only reason he did what he did, after all. It may have been a mistake, but the thought and the goal stayed the same. He wanted what was best for his family, and if that meant he had to step aside so they could make their own plans for the future, he was fine with that. Some part of him still wanted the weight of this responsibility to be on his shoulders, but the fact that he couldn't carry anything on his shoulders quickly put an end to that. Not right now, not the way he was. He might get prosthetics and be able to live almost normally again one day, if the wolves let him, but that was probably years away. So, for now, he decided to just relax and enjoy the time he still had with his family. It was time for the next generation to take over, though it might have happened sooner than he had expected. They might learn from the mistakes of those who came before them. He knew his daughter was ready for it because she had already shown she was more than able to be what the clan needed. And that made him feel better. Maybe the Yamanaka did have something to look forward to after all. The only sounds in his home were the rustling of papers, the scratching of a pen on paper, Mai taking a sip of her tea, and the almost inaudible humming of one of his wolf guards as she brushed his hair, which was still drying. He had just finished a quick spar with his sensei, but she still didn't like it when he called her that. He also found out that, as he had feared, he was getting rusty, so it's not surprising that he was drenched in sweat. He only had enough time for a quick shower, which was too bad. One might think that taking over a country would come with a lot of paperwork. A mercenary organization and the management of a secret cult within a powerful clan also gave him a lot of work. The people who could have helped him with the work he had now took care of this work right away. Sai took care of a lot of it for the wolves, and Mai took care of some of the rest. However, Mai was also in charge of most of the management, which included giving the former heiress advice on how to keep things from happening too soon. Even so, work from both sides still ended up in front of him on a regular basis. Even if it didn't, he still had to look at what the two of them were doing to make sure that any plans for the future would work. Then Nami no Kuni came along. Hana is a gift from the gods. She took care of a lot of the day-to-day business of the quickly growing town, so all he had to do was work on the country itself. Don't get him wrong, it was still a lot of work, but taking care of the undeveloped land that made up a big part of his new country was a lot easier than taking care of people. Even with their help, it was a lot of work. So, he was here now, spending what little time he had going over papers and reading reports. He could barely say that sparring was necessary to get away for a few hours, but now he had to finish the rest of the day's work and didn't have nearly enough time. He should be able to finish most of it before going to bed, though he had to wonder if he really needed that sleep. How about some caffeine instead? And if he didn't go to practice tomorrow, he could make up for the last week. It looks like going on a mission wasn't the best way to keep up with incoming paperwork. He quickly approved another request with a few strokes of his pen and wondered how something as silly as changing the color of sleeping bags from purple to red had made it all the way to him. Was Sai just trying to make a joke? Even if it did, it still had to go through Mai. Did she know about it? As he put the paper down and gave her a suspicious look, he could have sworn he saw an amused smile try to form on her face when she realized what he had just read. He sometimes forgot that they were so close they might as well have been siblings. Then again, they might have been. They thought about the fact that he had never asked. Still, he didn't see why it mattered in the end. He briefly thought about making her help him with that, but she already had a lot to do and this was one of the few times she could take a break. He wouldn't stop her from getting some rest, but he did wonder why she wasn't off with Sume, since they seemed close. He was about to go back to work when someone knocked on the door. Odd. Anko usually just walked in, and when Kurenai came by, which wasn't often because she was busy with her team, she was almost always seen by a wolf. He heard the door open and heard whispers from outside the room as his second guard, who had been sitting on his couch with a magazine and a bowl of chips, went to check it out. He didn't stay away for long before he came back with the Yamanaka heiress. Well, I didn't expect that, but maybe I shouldn't have. He had just attacked her father, after all. Luckily, she didn't look angry, at least not from the outside. Wasn't that a good sign? Oh, it looks like we have a visitor today. May I ask who you are? A good question, given all the different things she did. Ino, the daughter of Inoichi. I see. So she wasn't the clan heiress, a clan member, a Konoha genin, a council member, or even a friend from the academy. I'm glad to know. So, daughter of Inoichi, what brings you here? As if everyone there didn't know it so painfully well. Mai pretended to only be politely interested in the conversation, even though she was fully awake, and the wolf behind him could be seen tensing up as they continued to brush his hair. Both of them were ready to jump to his defense at the drop of a hat. Questions. She was still being vague, as if she wanted him to ask a specific question, but they both knew she was just trying to stay calm at the moment. He had to give her credit for that, because after what had just happened to her father, it probably wasn't easy for her to come talk to him. He wouldn't insult her by acting like she wouldn't have thought of the wolves right away, and he also wouldn't ignore the fact that she was right. You seek questions. Her lips almost turned up into a smile for a split second, but she quickly put them back down when she was reminded of where she was and why. No, I'm here today because I have questions, and I want to find answers. He put his pen down gently and folded his hands in front of his face as he looked into her eyes. And what questions trouble you so, Ino? Why? She paused, but before anyone could think she was waiting for an answer, she went on. No, that won't help me get the answer I need. She tried once more. What? One eyebrow went up, telling her to explain what she meant. What did he do? That was a full question. What did he do? What was it that made her act like that? Ah, now that's a good question, he said as he leaned forward and put his face on his hands. Sit down, Ino, and I'll tell you about 2 big mistakes your father made. She did as he asked and sat down across from him. She didn't notice the cup of tea she set down or the wolf, who had started working on their lord's hair again. Those didn't matter right now. However, this was. The first mistake was probably the biggest, because if he hadn't done it, the second one wouldn't have been a problem. Naruto leaned back a little, keeping one hand under his chin for support while the fingers of the other hand lightly drummed on the table. Almost as if he were going in a totally different direction, he went on. I liked your father, you know. He always seemed to have a good head on his shoulders, and his devotion to the well-being of his family, which included you and your mother, and the clan as a whole, was admirable. He liked to think things through, and he did so whenever he could. Even if he made a mistake, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary, but there's one thing that makes it into something that can't be forgiven. That answer was so obvious that she didn't even have to think about it. It was made with you in mind. It might be unfair, but that's how it was for everyone. Usually, you didn't care about what was going on as long as it didn't affect you or your family. But once it was there, you couldn't get rid of it. Very good, he said with a nod and a light smile on his lips. Even so, there almost wasn't a problem with what he did. Like I said, he liked to think things over and make plans before taking action. He seemed a bit rushed, but he did a good job setting things up. He sent them while I was away, whether on purpose or by chance I don't know. It was the perfect time. He sent his best, those who would complete the mission or give up everything to try. It was the perfect choice. And he gave them a task that would keep them from coming into direct conflict. It was the perfect assignment. At this point, Ino asked another question because she didn't know even this much about her father's actions. Who? Who did he send? She stopped for only a moment, thinking now as much about their job as their identity. What message did he send? She got another smile that showed a little bit of pride. At least for her, it was a strange smile. Even though she was sad about what he had done to her father, it was nice to be noticed. She had changed a lot from the fangirl she used to be. Spies. That was a relief to hear. In the big picture, spies were not that bad. Even though they were expected and a key part of the shinobi world, they could make or break a whole campaign. Shinobi villages also hired out assassins to the highest bidder, but enemies didn't like them as much as they did other shinobi. 3 spies were able to stay away from my patrols for several days before they were caught, he said. And that, in and of itself, isn't the problem. There are plenty of spies around Nami no Kuni right now, both because it's inevitable and because I want people to know about the wolves. No, the mistake here is the one thing that made Inoichi's spies different. They were able to communicate with each other. They killed all of my wolves. When Ino heard those words, she thought her heart had stopped. That had to be spies, right? Why else would they move against the wolves, which they would have known would bring the wrath of the pack down on the whole clan? Hurting them or fighting them was fine, but killing them was something the pack would never forgive, especially since they had already been cruel even when they were kind. The way her clan was before Kushina was proof of that, and that was just words. She couldn't even imagine what would happen to someone who killed a wolf, but had her father not already found out? When she compared the 2 crimes and their punishments, she couldn't help but feel, much to her shame and guilt, that her father had actually gotten off too easy. Then again, hadn't Naruto said he liked Inoichi? Was that why the punishment was less harsh on him, or was it because Naruto was directing it all at one person instead of many and had to make adjustments? If that were true, her family would never be able to understand how lucky they were. And that explained why her father seemed so happy even though he was in a bad way. Not because he got off easy, but because the rest of the clan didn't have to pay for his mistakes. She still didn't know for sure what those mistakes were, though. Naruto kept talking as if he wasn't talking about anything important, but he quickly fixed that. They did a great job, considering that they were killed by the explosive tags on the spy they caught, tags that were set off by one of the spies as he ran away. In fact, the whole mission he gave them was as close to perfect as it could get. The problem was that even textbook perfect actions cost your clan and, more importantly, my wolves. The mission cost them their lives, which was the first mistake. It wasn't all his fault, I'll give him that, because he hadn't told them to kill my kids, but it still happened under his command. He stopped there to give her a chance to think about what had been said so far and to give her a chance to talk. She took it, but again it was to ask a question. No one said anything about his punishment or how it was unfair. She didn't scream, cry, or say anything bad about him. No, just another simple question. Clarification. He had to wonder if she had accepted it or if she was just very good at controlling her feelings these days. He was amazed either way. And what's the second? Again, Naruto smiled, but this time it was mean. Still, there was a small amount of pride in his eyes, along with what she was almost tempted to call arrogant amusement, as if the answer was about a bug and a god. His answer just seemed to back up what she said about the look. He tried to keep it a secret from me. Of course. She was almost tempted to roll her eyes, but she didn't because she knew that wouldn't work. Maybe if they were friends or at least not talking about her father and how his actions had killed some of the wolves operatives that the young man in front of her thought of as his children, she would have taken the chance. In fact, he was thinking. He almost did it, so I guess that means it was a third mistake that sealed his fate, one that made him pay for the first two. What was that? This time, she didn't get a good reply. He waved his hand as if to say, not important. From her point of view, he had, at least for this meeting. I do have to wonder, though, why you needed me to tell you what had happened. She hadn't thought that would happen, but she answered anyway. Since you cut out his tongue and took off his arms, he can't talk very well. It's much easier for me to ask you than to ask him yes or no questions until I'm sure I know what's going on. True, he said at first. But when he looked at her, his eyes seemed to get harder all of a sudden. But that doesn't mean there aren't other ways. A Yamanaka could just go into his mind and talk to him there, I know for sure. Ino took a nervous swallow. At first, she thought that was something he hadn't thought of when he chose a punishment. It looks like he knew very well. It was, of course, the reason she didn't come right out and say she had already tried. That didn't seem to be a problem anymore. I tried, but he wouldn't say anything. Naruto's eyebrows went up, giving the impression that he was both impressed and interested. Oh, did he know? Nothing at all. She said, not a thing. He wouldn't even tell me, he wouldn't talk about it. Instead, he just shook his head, just like he did when people asked him about it in the real world. He pulled his lips together with a small smile. As I told you before, Ino, I like your father. He knows better than to try to get out of what I've told him to do. He paused and tilted his head to the side before nodding to himself. For now, though, let him know I'm happy with what he's doing. I will. All right, what else? No, she shook her head. If that's the case, you can go. I have some paperwork to do. With that, he turned back to the pile of papers in front of him. Even though she was fired quickly, she didn't waste any time getting out of there. That means, of course, that she didn't know about the purple eyes that were following her. The Yamanaka really did have a bad habit of making his life interesting, didn't they? The group didn't talk, at least not with words. Instead, they showed each other how they felt with their eyes, which was more than enough. Almost immediately, they turned away from each other and talked about what they were talking about. Even though he was the youngest, he was definitely the strongest of the group. Their brother, who was also the youngest, walked silently with a blank expression on his face and dull eyes that looked out over the sand. So strong, in fact, that he could crush them at any time without even thinking about it or making the slightest effort. Sometimes that gave him comfort, because they weren't his target, but neither of them was stupid enough to think they couldn't be in the blink of an eye. Surprisingly, it wasn't his presence that made them nervous at this time. Instead, it was the words of their father that kept going through their heads and making them unsure of the way they should go. Their orders were simple, and everyone knew what they meant until now. They were supposed to go to the upcoming Chunin exams like any other genin and try to get noticed, but in the end, that was just a small detail. Their main goal was to hide their brother's presence, which couldn't be explained in a foreign village. During the last event of the exam, their brother would give up control of his body to the demons sealed inside him and go on a rampage through the village that said it was their ally. At the same time, a force from both their village and a known small village would start an invasion with the sole goal of destroying Konohagakure. Or, that was supposed to be what was going to happen. Now, though, their father told them that their partner, who was supposed to send most of the troops and summons that their own village didn't have easy access to, wouldn't be taking part. It seemed like an old contact of theirs had gotten in touch with them after a long time and had set up shop in Konoha. Whatever deal they had made in the past was more useful than destroying the village, which had been their idea in the first place. It seemed strange, but it wasn't their job to ask questions. But it was their job to ask what they should do now. Their father told them to ignore the council's orders, saying that they would fail without their supporters' help and that they would be better off leaving if the others tried to go ahead with the invasion. Their cage had tried to talk the council out of it, and some agreed, but the majority seemed set on this course of action. Hey, dead set, wasn't that a good description? When their eyes moved away from their brother and back to each other, they both showed how nervous and uncertain they were feeling. Their brother would take part because his bloodlust would not let him do anything else, but Tamari and Konkura would be fine with not taking part. At this point, they had to wonder if that was still a choice. They watched her as she played her part on this big stage. They watched her every energetic move. A complicated play with a surprise ending that she wasn't allowed to see. It was run by both living and dead people. If you could call it a script, it was a jumbled mess that only made sense to those who knew the truth. Even back then, she had a feeling that neither of them really knew how this would end. Maybe they would win or lose, but it didn't matter. The ways to get to each one and the effects they have on the world would probably define it for a long time. She might not have paid as much attention to that fact as she should have. It was way too easy to just play her part, sometimes as the fool and sometimes as the puppeteer. She sometimes forgot which was which and, more importantly, which was her. Of course, she knew she was his no matter what, and that meant she would always have a name. In the end, it didn't matter what role she played as long as there was one thing that was the same in her past, present, and future lives. This job was done by Naruto, who was the leader of the wolves. In turn, she served him. At least from her point of view, they were both getting something out of the relationship, so it was a win-win. But they could argue for a long time about who got the better end of the deal. Even if she did care, she never looked that far into it. She knew he was an important part of her life, and she would be an important part of his no matter what. She liked to think about the fact that they had each other. She didn't like thinking about the eyes that followed her every move though. It was to be expected that her act and the fact that she was one of only 2 women in this group of S-ranked men would make her stand out, but the main problem was who was paying attention to her. She could deal with the other people's eyes, and neither the Jushinist nor the Iwa Nin were all that ugly if you could get past their verbal quirks, like the uns, and the constant stream of bad language, but there was one pair of eyes she couldn't stand to look at her, especially if the gaze was what she thought it was. The eyes of the man she thought was the Jushinist. Uchiha fucking Itachi. Her no good, kinslaying, and her son as a traitor and a scumbag. Well, he wasn't really a bastard because she had been married for a while before he was born, but the feeling stayed the same. Even just seeing him look at her was disgusting and made her very angry, but the idea that he might be interested in her in any way made her skin crawl. After what he did, that piece of filth would never be good enough for her. She realized that she couldn't fully blame him because he didn't know who she was, even though at first it seemed like he did based on how much he stared at her, and even she had to admit that the figure she cut in a cloak that was very tight by Akatsuki standards was pretty hot. She could understand, but it wasn't something she liked. In no way. Still, it could be useful in some ways. If he was interested, he might let down his guard, giving her a chance to make up for what she had done wrong. The one in which she gave birth to him. It would give her a chance to get revenge and make up for the loss of her family, and it would also get rid of a powerful member of Akatsuki, a group that could one day be a threat to Naruto. The government couldn't let that happen. Of course, she was only able to think about doing something like this because she could tell herself that at least some of it was for Naruto. There were just so many things that could go wrong, and the act itself was awful in any way. But he depended on her, and she wasn't going to let down the only person she cared about. She turned around to face him because of this. Her body language never changed, but she still managed to show a kind of innocent embarrassment. No one knew how it did that, but the way she bounced on her feet to make her hips move kept people from thinking about it. At the very least, it made sure he paid attention to her. Mo Itachi-sensei, when you look at me like that, it's so embarrassing. I'm getting all flustered. When Uchiha's usually stony face had a noticeable dusting of pink, she felt both happy and disgusted. On the one hand, she had, for the time being, managed to catch him off guard and let him know that she knew how long he liked to look at her cloaked body. On the other hand, the traitor she had given birth to probably thought she might be interested as she thought this. She was pretty sure that the jerk was thinking bad things about her as he hurriedly left the room. Oh, what she did for her dear son. Naruto should show his thanks the next time they see each other. Ideally, there would be lots of time to cuddle. Makoto loved to be held close. He didn't care about the guards' curious looks or the fact that at least a few of them were trying to hide smiles of amusement. Even so, they didn't try to stop him, which was at least something. He didn't know if that was because the head of the clan had given him permission to visit, because some of them were part of the cult that was working with his forces, or because they could tell from what he was carrying what he was doing at their compound today. Did you do something wrong, or are you trying to get points for when you do? Someone asked as he walked by.
He gave the man a smirk from behind his load of bakery boxes, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he kept walking without stopping. He didn't wait for Aguita. In fact, he ignored the clan member who was waiting inside the gate to greet visitors, since he already knew where he needed to go.
Partly because he had been here before, and partly because he had wolves who sent him regular reports with information about everything from the most popular dishes cooked by the kitchen staff to the layout of the whole complex. It tended to give someone like him a little bit of an edge. He got to his destination quickly by taking a few paths that were mostly used by servants, which were family members who had been marked as slaves by their own family. He wasn't sure if the smell of his gifts or his quick taps on the wood brought her to the door in the end. It was strange that the doors to the bedrooms here were made of wood, while the doors to the other rooms were made of rice paper. No matter what he did, the door was already open before his hands left the wood. The next thing that happened was an embarrassed squeak. He didn't know if it was because of what she did or because she found out who was on the other side, but she did seem to be getting better. She was able to talk again quickly, which showed how quickly she was able to get better. She moved like she was going to hug him, but stopped when she saw the boxes in her arm. She was confused at first, but then she realized who it was, and her excitement grew even more. She pulled him into her room so quickly that he was almost bouncing. She quickly shut the door and moved to take the boxes from him.
At the last second, she stopped because she remembered who held her prize, but all he did was smile, which she took as a sign that she could go on. As soon as she got them out of his arms and onto a clean desk, she opened the top box and took in the beautiful sight of fresh baked goods. He had the feeling that everyone had forgotten about him because of how good the pastries were. He sat down on her bed, which was so much more comfortable than his own, and waited. After 10 minutes and half a box, he coughed softly to let her know he was there. She turned around and let out another squeak. She looked like a guilty chipmunk as she held her half-eaten cinnamon bun close to her chest, not noticing that the icing was getting all over her sweater. "I take it you like my gifts?" he asked. He knew the answer, but asked anyway. She quickly nodded her head because she couldn't speak because her cheeks were too full. It wasn't as cute as Anko, but it was pretty cute for Hinata. Did that just mean that the two of them were cute, or did it also mean that they were cute in Naruto's eyes, since he saw them that way? He shook the idea out of his mind. He could think about it again later. For now, though, his visit was about more than just satisfying Hinata's never-ending desire for pastries. Even though, yes, that probably was more fun. He just said, "I got your letter." Hinata was about to swallow her prize when she was reminded that she should have asked another branch member for some milk first. She almost choked on it. Her eyes went straight to the small vial of blood in the drawer of her desk. Or as innocently as a vial of blood from a fellow shinobi from the village of Konoha could. So, maybe not all that innocently, especially since it could be used to link her to whatever had happened to Inoichi. Most of the details weren't known yet, so people in Konoha talked a lot about what might have happened. But the fact that she had even thought of something like that was pretty cool. The Hinata before, and most of her classmates probably wouldn't worry about something like that yet, but to be fair, she had been worrying about it almost non-stop for days. It was a sign that the wolves, or maybe just Naruto, were getting to her. In the shinobi world, that wasn't always a bad thing. Not in this case, at least. He waited until she was better and had finished what was probably the rest of the cinnamon roll, which was still all over her jacket, before he ate it. Should he tell the poor girl or no, he'd just wait. Don't make her feel bad now, because he could use that to change the subject later. I should probably start by saying I'm sorry, which is part of why I brought gifts. I haven't been keeping you up to date on the wolves as well as I should have, and you probably felt very lost when you got that gift. Even though it wasn't necessary, she nodded to confirm, and he gave her a small, warm smile to comfort the young woman. He made a spot next to him on her bed and asked her to join him. She did so, but she was very embarrassed. She didn't know what role he played in her life, but he was still a boy, and they were going to be alone on her bed. Since she was the daughter of the clan leader, this was obviously the first time something like this had ever happened to her. If she had male friends when she was younger, or even just any friends, it might make it seem less personal and more casual. Sad to say, sheltered was a good way to describe her, but the innocence that came from it was definitely cute. When she finally got to the bed and sat down next to him, he put out his right arm and pulled her until their legs touched and then pulled her even more until her side was against his chest. He started to fill her in by putting his chin on her head, which was only possible because the little girl was standing at an angle. He began, "Inoichi is a good man. I like him. He acts like a clan leader and a caring father should. The only problem is that because of that, he couldn't ignore me. We had a ceasefire, a tentative truce, and even though he didn't want to break it, he needed to know what I was doing so that his clan and family wouldn't get in the way." He paused now to give her time to think about what he had said so far before going on. "The problem started when he tried to avoid getting on our bad side, but ended up getting on our bad side anyway." What did he do? He couldn't see her face, but he could tell it was red. "It wasn't even him," he said. "He had sent spies to keep an eye on us, which is what any good leader would have done, but those spies killed my children so we wouldn't find out who they were and possibly attack their clan in retaliation. 5 wolves were taken from me and killed that night so that one of his spies could live and report back to him. It's great that you're a shinobi, but as a father I can't accept that." Inoichi had already gotten his spy out of Konoha and set up somewhere else, so he was the only one left who could feel my anger. I had a lot of respect for Inoichi, but it grew when he took responsibility for what he had done. He didn't try to get away and he didn't beg. Even when I gave him a way out of some of his punishment, he didn't take it. So much determination and character are rarely seen. What did you do to him, exactly? The rest of it made sense, in a way. She was close to her own wolf guard's altar because she spent so much time with them, and she knew it would hurt her a lot if they were killed. She could understand his anger, and she knew he wouldn't let people who hurt him or his family get away. The only thing she didn't know was what had happened to the man he spoke so highly of. How strange that he seemed to both curse and praise the person who had killed the children he loved. "Because he tried to hide it from me, I took his legs so he couldn't run, and his arms so he could never again raise his hands against my children," Naruto said, noticing how her whole body tensed up and began to shake against him. "I finally cut off his tongue so he couldn't tell his men to attack me. One piece," he said again, "for the life of each wolf he stole." Pulling her closer, he put her on his lap, and she buried her face in his chest as she tried to understand what the young man she was clinging to had done. It was horrible, really horrible, and it was hard for her to believe that someone who had been so kind to her could do something so bad to someone else. "He's still alive, little lamb," he told her, rubbing her back in circles to make her feel better. He was aware that the icing was now getting all over him, and he was glad he hadn't worn his furs that day because it would have been awful to clean them. He was happy to take all of the punishment that his clan deserved so that the others could be spared. Don't cry for him, it was always his fault, from the beginning to the end. After a few minutes, she calmed down, but she didn't move to get off his lap or move away from the chest she had her face in. At that time, Inoichi was an enemy and a threat to my pack and family. He had to pay for it, but I wouldn't take away his own family. I gave you the vial because of this. She looked up now with a confused look on her face. This is proof that he paid the price for what he did to my family. The pack looks out for you, little lamb, and those who follow you. This vial is meant to remind you of what happens to people who go against us, so you can be sure that we will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. That wasn't true at all, of course. He gave the blood to all of his allies, and she was one of them. She was the only one who wouldn't know what the gift was for, and she was also the only one he wasn't sure he wanted to eat the blood. She was still so sweet and innocent, and he liked that. It made her easier to control. So, when he got the letter from her saying she was confused, he realized he had made a mistake and moved as quickly as he could to fix it. He liked the twist he had put on it, especially since he had thought of it on the way here. He did stop at a local bakery, but the main reason was to give himself more time to think of an answer. Even so, it seemed to have worked pretty well, and the confused look on his face had turned into a look that was somewhere between gratitude and admiration. Gods above, her family had made her so malleable. He was glad for that, really, because he liked her innocence and the way she looked up to him, but it was still a shame that the Hyuga would leave their heiress so desperate for a leader, even if they knew that the youngest would eventually take over. He would be that person, that protector and guide she needed so much. The little lamb was a goddess to her people, and he was her shepherd. Through her, he gained great political power and a lot of resources, or he would in time, and through him, she gained someone to look up to and care for her. Even though it wasn't the most fair deal, no one could deny that they both got something out of it. Even if only one of them really knew what was going on. Still, there was no reason for her to know any of that, so he just smiled softly at her. Do you have anything we could use to make a necklace for you out of it? Maybe a string or a ribbon. Quickly, like a scared rabbit, she jumped off his lap and started digging through his drawers until she found a white silk ribbon, which he said was like a rabbit running away. From where he was sitting on her bed, he could see a lot more. He wondered if she had ever had longer hair or if she planned to in the future. Her current style was cute, but he could see how it would look less good as she grew, especially if she was supposed to be a goddess. Then it would be best to start on that soon, since he would need her to keep that position soon. When she cautiously sat back down on his lap on the bed and gave him the ribbon and the vial, he started to think of the best way to convince her. He could just ask her to grow it out for him, and she would. Even better, he could just tell her to grow it, and she would. Adding the part about it being for him would go further, but both fell short. A more subtle approach would be better, one that did more to keep his place in her life. And what better way to spin it than as a compliment that made them spend more time together? He put the ribbon around her neck, which was now securely wrapped around the vial. He took a moment to brush away her hair, which was tickling the back of her neck. "You have such beautiful hair," he said quietly as he ran his fingers through it. "It's too bad there's not more of it, because I'm sure it would look great," he said when she was no longer paying attention. "I suppose it's for the best," he sighed. "With everything I'm asking you to do, it would be hard for you to take care of it on your own. I would have to come help you brush it every day." He felt her get a little stiffer in his grip before he asked, "Really? You'd come help me brush it?" "Absolutely. If I could help you with it at night, I'd be over here. And if something kept me from coming, I'd send my to take care of you and your beautiful hair." When he said that, she almost melted back into him. She probably thought about how nice it would be to have someone there for her. She was left in a very sad situation, but he was very lucky to be the one who put himself in the position it gave him. Yes, he was using the poor girl. He needed her and her clan, and having her and her sister under his control would help him get what he wanted. That user took care of her, of course. She needed someone, anyone, to show her the way, and he could say it was for her own good. Better him than someone who would take advantage of her completely. At least in his own mind. She was sitting on his lap, so she couldn't see the small smile of victory on his lips. He fully admitted to manipulating her. Yes, but even he thought it a bit sad though certainly beneficial for himself how easy it was to do. She was the goddess of her people, revered as the will of fate given life. To them she was a guide, a symbol of light and a reassurance that their lives were predetermined. It was an odd belief, he felt, but if they drew comfort from thinking their lives had nothing to do with consequences, then who was he to say otherwise? No, he didn't mind that they were blind. It gave her the chance to lead them and made her want him even more. She wanted and needed her shepherd. He was more than happy to play the part. The darkness was all-consuming, like a presence that wrapped around her from all sides and tried to eat her. She thought about letting it happen. The other half, on the other hand, fought back hard. She couldn't give up on life just yet, not after everything she had been through. He was still out there, and she knew he needed her help as he always had. Her place was beside him, as his eternal companion, and she wouldn't let him down by giving into this small test. She was wrong to take matters into her own hands when he was so determined to stay in charge. Instead, she should just tell him what to do so he could do it himself. What did it really matter how it was done as long as it was done? If she had to play a bigger game to keep him happy, she was fine with that. She was even willing to give up the illusion of control if it meant she could keep him. He was much more important to her than a job that made her feel good about herself. She'd be much more proud if she knew he was hers. Still, there wasn't much she could do now that she was stuck here to pay for her mistakes. She had been so close every day, but her jail kept falling short on their deal. Already, the fool had tried to use her power against her warden, which was against the rules, but she had never talked to him about it. She should have knelt down before him and begged for mercy, but instead she hung out with the young man's first enemies, which was a shame because she had brought them on herself. She had made a bad choice and moved too quickly, both when she did it and after it was found out. In the end, she left him with the results of both. That's why, of course, she still had to pay for what she did until she could make it up to him and show that she still had his best interests at heart, even though she always had, and that he could still trust her to be in his life. But all of that would take time, which she didn't have. With each passing day, her chances seemed to get smaller and smaller, and the idea that she would be back with him, teasing, laughing, and eating in the wonderful world he had made just for her seemed more and more like a distant dream. Slowly but surely, she felt like she was coming to. And when she did, everything would be lost, and she would spend the rest of eternity trapped in this god-forsaken darkness, never seeing him again. That wasn't good enough. But how could she tell the girl that in the right way? Mito smiled from deep inside the darkness. Oh, she had some thoughts. He stopped walking when he heard the familiar sound of sparring. It sounded like the heiress, but as far as he knew, she only trained with him. She might have wanted to surprise him the next time they were alone. By changing his path, he came to the main garden of the Hyuga, where he could see that other branch members had also stopped to watch. This was to be expected, since so many people passed through this area every day, but for it to have gotten their full attention, it must have been interesting. He had a point. His youngest daughter, the heir to the Hyuga clan, moved slowly with her opponent, drifting in a circle in a clockwise direction as they waited for a chance to strike first or, if that didn't work, a chance to block their opponent's move. That wasn't very interesting, though he did think it was odd that the Hyuga were circling each other like that, which may have been why she moved. What did catch his attention was who she moved against. Naruto, who was a genin and a friend of the wolves, moved in perfect sync with his daughter, both of them looking for weaknesses to take advantage of. Oh, and he had nothing on. A quick search of the garden turned up the missing garment crumpled on the ground and covered in frosting. Blinking twice and briefly activating his Byakugan, he could confirm that it was frosting, but it was hard to tell if it was icing or frosting because there were boxes nearby. His late wife had a sweet tooth as bad as their daughter's, so he knew all the local bakeries. Hinata was sitting next to the boxes, nibbling on something sweet while watching their guest. For once, her jacket was nowhere to be found. If he had to guess, it probably met the same fate as Naruto's shirt. In fact, he was willing to bet it was the same accident that had happened to both pieces of clothing. After all, Hinata had always loved hugs almost as much as she loved cinnamon rolls. Both were likely to blame for Naruto not having a shirt on. Aside from that, everything else seemed pretty clear, which was backed up by Hanabi's sudden lunge, hands knifing to stop the boy's Tenketsu Ken. Then he changed. In contrast to the sharp force of the Juken, his style favored smooth curves that were maybe a bit more elegant but just as strong, each move like a wave crashing. His ancestors would be proud that he got a description that fit an Uzumaki. After avoiding a few well-aimed blows from his heiress, Naruto moved forward and turned his left hand so that the palm was facing Hanabi's right shoulder. Her own hand, which was about to hit him with the wrathful justice of the Hyuga, stopped in place. 2 fingers on her wrist stopped her strike, and as his arm kept moving away from him, they turned it in a different direction. She was caught off guard and thrown off balance. He didn't think twice about making use of that. When his right palm hit her sternum, she fell to her back and looked up at him with wide eyes. She wasn't the most skilled Hyuga, but she was fast. In a style that relied on many accurate strikes, speed was more important than skill, so the fact that she could be one of the fastest in the clan when she wanted to was a big deal. That wasn't the case now, since it was just a sparring match, but she was still pretty fast. Hiyashi frowned as he saw the boy offer his downed daughter a hand, which she took without complaining or trying to trick him. The fact that their style was so rigid was an obvious weakness, but speed and the dangerous nature of their strikes made it a solid style that worked well against most opponents. Seeing the boy move reminded Hiyashi that someone faster than them could take away the main advantage of Hyuga Shinobi. More worrying, though, was the fact that Naruto wasn't just fast enough. He also seemed to move easily against his daughter's Juken, as if he knew what to expect and how to move before she could strike. Naruto knew how to stop the Juken, and it looked like he was teaching his daughter the same thing. His hands were on hers as he stood behind her and led her through a series of moves that were obviously meant to block attacks in the areas his clan usually attacked. It was horrible to see a counter so casually shown, and in the middle of their compound, no less. The game was against Naruto, but he had to wonder. Did Naruto really think it was all just a game? The early afternoon sun felt good on his pale skin. It was the first time it had touched him in who knows how long. Which made sense, since most people didn't go outside without a shirt on. Or he didn't at least. Partly because he didn't have much time, and partly because shirts were a good way to cover his seal. Well, both of them, but sometimes it was hard to tell them apart because they were so close to each other. Still, if less people saw them, he wouldn't have to answer as many questions that he shouldn't have to. People shouldn't know the truth about his second seal, and even the gods didn't like the fact that it existed. So much was all he could remember about his time with Mito. Mito was a name he hadn't heard or thought about in a long time. He wondered what had happened to her, even though he knew the answer. She was in the same seal she had always been in. The only difference was that his own seal wasn't on that one anymore. In fact, that wasn't very clear, was it? No, the seals were still connected because they had to be. It was the same seal, but it was in two different places and used two different chakra systems to keep its prisoner in place. Now that he thought about it, that didn't make sense. He could understand that there were two seals, but from what he knew, Mito was now locked away by a single seal with two parts. He might want to learn more about the art of sealing, if only to understand how his own seal will work. He used it in a simple way. He wanted something to happen, and it did. He didn't know how it did it, though, because he hadn't thought about the details before. The great Kyuubi no Kitsune, on the other hand, made it feel just a little bit more important. Even more so because he was the one who carried her seal. The same seal that was now almost impossible to tell apart from the seal that would take his wishes and turn them into working seals as long as they had a base component. If he wasn't careful, things could go very badly wrong very quickly. A chill went all the way down his back. Why did these thoughts come to him now? He had been trying out different things with the seal to find a way for Sai and Hinata to add and take away certain seals, but he had never thought of something like this. Was it because he hadn't thought about Mito since he found the wolves and then fought with his sister? Had she been so far from his mind that he hadn't thought about what would happen if he messed with his own seal, which he didn't plan to do in the first place, when all he would have to do was to get it done? He had to wonder how aware he had to be for the seal, which, as far as he could tell, fed directly from his chakra system, to decide it was a valid desire of his and change things without him knowing. Was a simple dream enough for it to go to work, possibly letting out the Kyuubi no Kitsune, turning the seal into a bomb powered by her, or even tearing space and time apart? By default, seals was about controlling special realities. Even when it was used in the most simple ways, it was a terrible power that couldn't be underrated. And yet, he had never really taken it for granted. Instead, he had never really thought about how powerful it was. Removing or changing seals would be seen as a great accomplishment by the rest of the world, and it would take a very skilled sealmaster to do it. However, that was nothing compared to the real, and now terrifying, power of the ink that had been put on his right arm. Then again, he might want to wait, even if it's just for a short time. If this had no limits, wouldn't it be better for him to think of ways he could use it before he found out? Otherwise, he might have to give up on ideas before trying them out or find out that the seal wouldn't work, which would cause him to make bad seals that would have been perfect otherwise. Yes, he would give himself some free time before he learned what other people knew about the sealing arts. Once he knew things were really possible, he wouldn't have to worry about being persuaded otherwise and missing out on such great chances. A small child's scream near him broke him out of his thoughts. Since he was walking around Konoha without a shirt, he was getting a lot of strange looks, which made him want to find out more. He took a back alley and a side street to get to one of Konoha's less traveled roads. It was strange, because the buildings on one side were the market district buildings. He couldn't figure out why they weren't built back to back, with each street right next to the main street. Maybe people liked their shopping areas to be busy and noisy. Of course, that wasn't at all important. What mattered was the picture of a young Sarutobi being lifted up by someone who could only be a Suna shinobi. He thought she was a little bit older than him. She stood behind him with her arms crossed and one hip cocked, waiting impatiently to go on. Since he didn't have a shirt on, it would be hard for him to act like a noble man. Maybe he should act more like a wolf. No, too aggressive. Since they were guests in Konoha, he would just have to make do. A plan would have made things so much easier. Sarutobi, he called out as he got closer. That got everyone's attention, which was the point, but it also gave those who were smart enough a moment to figure out what was going on. The blonde was one of these people, and her eyes quickly went to the little boy her brother was holding by the shirt. She did a great job of keeping her cool, but you could see that she was getting pale. Even if there wasn't an invasion, anything against the Sarutobi clan was a bad idea because the current Hokage is from that clan. I understand that you want to welcome our allies to the village, but maybe next time you could do it with less energy, yes. Konohamaru didn't want to argue, so he quickly nodded, and while the Suna shinobi was distracted, he was able to get out of his grasp. He didn't waste any time running to Naruto, who he thought was safe. He sent the boy away by saying, "Your uncle is probably feeding his team lunch right about now. If you're quick, you might be able to join them." Only he knew if the boy was trying to get a free meal or just get out of the area. Since he didn't run away, he would probably say it was the meal, but that wasn't important. As soon as Konohamaru left, Naruto turned his attention to the foreign team. His face changed from that of a somewhat disappointed but not really angry elder to a green more of a smirka that could only be described as vicious. Not the smartest, are you, Bunraku? It could have meant that he knew what kind of shinobi he was or that he didn't like his outfit, neither of which would have pleased the Suna shinobi. It would be a very, very bad idea to fight the grandson of the Hokage and the nephew of a former Guardian 12. When the puppeteer realized what could happen if Naruto did what he did, his smile got a little wider. He turned the conversation back to himself by saying, "Thank you. Who knows what could have happened to you if I hadn't stopped by." Kankuro made a scowling face, and even his sister looked a little annoyed by what he was saying. The reaction didn't bother Naruto at all. "Captain?" he asked, which made the two Suna shinobi very confused. "Would you like to help me teach our guests something?" he asked. Without hesitating, a shinobi wearing a wolf's mask jumped down from one of the market buildings and landed next to him. The buildings were only 3 or sometimes 4 or 5 stories tall, and there were empty lots between them and the side street they were on. Overall, it wasn't a bad jump, but it was more impressive that he could hear them from so far away and was willing to do what the redhead asked. No foreigner would think about how much he looked like their brother or how scary it was to see someone who looked so much like their brother smirking at them. Of course, Naruto-sama, the older of the two, was more worried about that than about the man's willingness to answer the young man's call. Kabuto didn't bother with any of the political lessons because he was more interested in puppets than in the outside world. She did, however, like to think that she knew everyone who was important in the grand scheme of things. She had never heard of anyone named Naruto, and she couldn't think of any reason why an Anbu would speak so highly of him. The wolf mask went from barely pointing in the direction of the young man to pointing straight at them, probably right in the middle of them to get that effect. Doing these things to a shinobi would have been bad, but doing them to a civilian would have been worse. Instead, you chose an academy student from the same shinobi clan as the Hokage. And how close were they to doing something? Naruto asked, never taking the smirk off his face. The wolf replied, "We could have helped at any time. But I kept my team back until the puppeteer actually hit him." Konkuro looked worried because he knew how close he had come to doing it. But his sister paid attention to something else he said. He said, "Squad," and the boy called him, Captain. It's likely that they were surrounded. Her eyes moved quickly from side to side as she tried to find them. She looked in both obvious and silly places. At first, she couldn't see them at all, but then, as if they knew she was looking, they started to slowly show themselves without fully moving. Her whole face lost all of its color. Not because they were surrounded, which was already known, or because she couldn't find them right away. She was a fighter, not a sensor or tracker, but because they all wore the same mask, that of a growling wolf. These weren't Anbu, as she and her brother probably thought, but wolves. The group that had helped them invade instead chose to work with the group that had helped them invade. A supporter who, if her father was to be believed, had such a grudge against Konoha that he was the one who came up with the idea of an invasion to wipe Konoha off the map. Somehow, this obviously pro-Konoha group was able to get him to give up on those goals because it was better for them. So, it was obvious that it was a very bad idea to make them angry on their own land. He waved his hand in a vaguely dismissive way, as if he could sense how uncomfortable she was getting around the wolves, who came running when he spoke. "Thank you for your help, Captain. I can handle this from here on out." The man nodded, and the rest of the wolves quickly followed. It didn't make her feel as good as she might have thought it would. Even though they were gone, it only showed how much power this young man had among them. That person had been a captain, which wasn't the highest rank but was definitely not a grunt. This meant that the person in front of them, who looked like her youngest brother without a shirt on, was not low on the totem pole. Not when he was giving them orders on a patrol, which was clear. They were following the current orders, which were to patrol, but he changed that, and they did not question it. That required a lot of effort. She didn't know who he was, though. And maybe that's why. The only name they knew for the wolves was Tsukiyomi, which was the name of the daimyo of Nami no Kuni. Did she think that this was him? Of course not. Walking around Konoha without a shirt when she was only a few years older than her own siblings. Preposterous. It also helped a little that the wolf had called him, Naruto-sama. No one would choose a name like that to hide their identity. She'd think about whether or not that was why she was picking it, but she knew she was probably overthinking things. For now, the fact that the young man knew the wolves was enough. She asked him in a simple way, "You're with the wolves, right?" He turned his head to the side a little. He finally said, "Maybe," and his smirk got bigger and bigger until it looked a lot like a wolf who had cornered its prey. "Is there a reason why you need to know?" "My father wants to get in touch with them." A friend of his told him that they currently supported them and suggested that he do the same. "Oh, interesting." His smile disappeared so quickly that it was almost startling. "Don't worry about finding them. If they're interested they'll find you," he said. "How would they even know that we were interested?" She asked again, cocking one hip and resting her hand on it. "I don't think they just go up to anyone who catches their eye and expect them to be friendly, do they?" Naruto gave a snort. "Of course not. That would be stupid. But, like I said, you don't need to worry. They already know you're interested." The smirk came back briefly. Was that an admission that he was really with them, or a sign that they were still being watched? They had already shown that they couldn't find the hidden wolves, so it was possible that they had never left. Or, maybe they were contacted by the same person who told her father, the Cage, about them. If that was the case, it would prove that he was connected to the group in some way. "Now, I'm guessing you're my father's acquaintance." He said the word as if it made him laugh, rolling it around on his tongue and letting it fall off as if he tasted something wrong with it that no one else did. Made some more suggestions. "I'm very interested to know if your father also paid attention to those." "Well, there's no doubt about it now. It's a wolf of some kind." Tamari took a nervous swallow before answering. She knew it wasn't the best answer, and it wasn't the kind you want to give in enemy territory, or what was very close to being enemy territory. "My father was open to most of the ideas, but there were others who weren't. It's possible that they won't follow the advice that was given to them." Konkuro gave her a look, knowing that she had pretty much admitted that the invasion was still being planned and that her words might have just set them on a path that could put them against their brother. Neither of them would want to be killed by a psychotic killer who could crush them with just a thought. On the other hand, Naruto cocked his head again. Your father will soon need some strong allies. It won't be easy to keep a hidden village going without a shinobi force. It was said in a way that made it clear it was the truth, not a possibility, and both sand shinobi knew it. Their father also knew what the council's actions could cost them, but the fools were so short-sighted and desperate to fix the damage done to their village by their daimyo's neglect that they couldn't see that their path would lead to ruin. Not everyone there agreed, though. Gaara slid down from his tree in a stream of sand and stood next to Naruto with his arms crossed over his chest and his teal eyes narrowed. He said, in a voice that was somewhere between grinding stones and shifting sands, Suna doesn't need a shinobi force. They have me. Naruto said, patriotic, but not enough. Patriotic? No, but I'll stay with them as long as they give me goals. I like sand, and Sunagakure is easy for me to get to. Okay, so you're not patriotic, but that doesn't change the fact that you can't replace the shinobi forces of a whole village on your own. At best, you'll be turned into a small town. Then I'll just destroy all the big villages until we're the biggest. Naruto gave a smirk of amusement. He knew a Jinchuriki was one because he had talked to the Kyuubi herself. You must be very proud, Shukaku, to think that when even the small village of Takigakure has Biju that are stronger than you. Gaara's hand shot up to grab his head, and as his inner demon raged, the pain flared. Kankuro and Tamari both moved to the side of the street, just behind their brother, so they wouldn't get caught in any possible crossfire. Mother, Gaara stuttered. Mother demands blood. Naruto shook his head as if he didn't like what was said. Then your mother is a fool. With a few quick flicks of his left hand, the bandages on his right arm fell off and were easily pulled away from the skin. Gaara's teal eyes looked up at the shinobi on the other side of him just as Naruto pushed chakra through the seal matrix that covered his arm, lighting it up so it couldn't be missed. Shukaku stopped moving as soon as he was inside Gaara's seal. As the weakest Biju, he didn't know what his container was seeing, but his instincts told him it was a threat to his life. Shukaku wanted to stay on Earth more than anything else. Sand that had been gathering behind Gaara, ready to be used, suddenly fell flat, trembling like puddles on the ground, as the single-tailed beast also ran away from the unknown threat. This was far worse than knowing he was going to be sealed or having one of the other Biju angry at him and trying to get his revenge. This was something that broke into the realm of the gods, and even he could see that. And no. Teal's eyes got wider than they ever had before as he stared in shock at the other redhead. Stay away. Naruto smiled at how easy it seemed to control the Biju, which had way too much power over its container. Tamari and Kankuro, on the other hand, felt all their warmth leave their bodies and a cold fear grip their souls. Gee Gaara. Tamari managed. What's wrong? What's that? Mother's scared. It scares Mother. His breathing became fast and shallow, and he felt panic like he'd never felt before. Mother had always been there for him, making him better than everyone else. As long as he stayed in her good graces, nothing could hurt him. He thought that, at least. Never before had he felt so weak, so vulnerable. It made him mad, hated more than anything else. But now he knew what it was like to be afraid, and it paralyzed him. He had never experienced fear before, and he didn't know how to deal with one of people's most basic instincts when he had lost it so long ago. She's afraid of it, she's afraid of him, and I won't let him wipe us out. He kept talking, his voice frantic as his limbs shook from wanting to run away and adrenaline drained from muscles that were frozen. Even though he wanted to move, he couldn't because of the first predator he could remember. He didn't say the rest of his mother's words because it was hard enough for him to find the words to say. Shukaku's initial fear was bad, but what he thought about what was going on made everything worse. The Biju only knew that there was a threat in front of them that had power in the realms of the gods. There was really only one thing to conclude from this. They were right in front of a god. Gaara could have sworn he saw it after that. The being's smirk seemed oddly pointed, and its purple eyes sparkled with amused threat, waiting for him to make a move against it. His skin was as pale as the moon and almost glowed in the early afternoon sun, giving him an ethereal quality. The redhead wouldn't realize that he was overreacting because of the sudden rush of fear and the gibbering of the Biju he chose to believe was the weakest and least stable. He would only know that he was overreacting because his mother thought so and his eyes told him so. He was no match for this creature, and he wouldn't dare do anything out in the open where it could see him coming. No, that would not help him stay alive. He would live now, avoiding its wrath and being able to breathe, but it would always be a threat, something that could kill him at any time. It was a real danger that couldn't be ignored, but it would. So far. Just until Gaara found a way to be sure he could beat it. For the first time since he was young, the young man started to actually think, plan, and act like a shinobi instead of a force of nature. So, Gaara, a shinobi from Sunagakur, thought about what he should do first. He fell like a marionette whose string had been cut. He landed on his knees and draped his body over them, laying on his back in front of the predator to try to stay alive long enough to kill it. His siblings watched, unable to understand what was going on or what their brother was doing. That was fine, they didn't matter, and if they wanted to anger this being, they could. In fact, that was better, because then he could see how strong his opponent was and figure out how to beat him. Kankuro kept struggling, looking from his downed brother to the young man who had done this, unable to decide what to do next. Luckily, his older sister came to his rescue. "Our apologies, Naruto-sama," she said, using a form of address she had heard before. "We didn't mean any harm. I hope you understand that the Biju's wishes are not our own and that we don't want anything bad to happen to you." Naruto gave her another scary grin and then turned and walked away while slowly rewrapping his arm. "Remember, then, to be good. The wolves will be watching." He looked over his shoulder one last time, and each of them felt like he was looking right into their eyes. And with that, he went down an alley to get back to the market, leaving 3 Suna shinobi behind to wonder who the hell they had just met. When there was a knock on the door, his secretary popped her head in to say that he had a visitor. Well, not really. The only thing it did was break the semi-comfortable silence between the 2 former rivals. They were still rivals, but the game they played now was small and done more out of habit than anything else. Yes, send them in. Hiruzen wasn't even paying attention enough to hear the name of his visitor. He was more focused on the paperwork he was trying to finish for the day. There wasn't much point in putting it off if he and Danzo were going to keep meeting even though they didn't have anything else to talk about. More than anything, they had been meeting at the same time and day of the week for decades because it was what they were used to. Even though it didn't matter much anymore, the habit had set in and it just wasn't worth the feeling of something being off that would come with trying to change things at this point. Of course, the person who did come in was a pleasant surprise. Most of the time, at least. Hiruzen still liked the boy, but he didn't like how he was changing, and it didn't help that he had caused a rift between them when he used to think of the boy and his family as his own. The chance to see him and maybe make things better was always welcome, though. "Oh, Naruto, how are you today? Why are you in the office of an old man on such a nice day?" A little less tense than he was before Naruto had a chance to set up their relationship, but that was the benefit of Naruto talking first. He didn't think that his tone would last for the whole meeting. It probably wouldn't even make it through the young man's first sentence. "Hokage-sama," Naruto said, ignoring the fact that he wasn't wearing a shirt. Hiruzen wasn't going to ask, and Naruto started off in a very businesslike way. Hiruzen and Danzo, who had turned to look at the Hokage's second uninvited guest, would have enjoyed a game of words with the young man. Before Hiruzen could think about it too much, Naruto continued. "Suna's forces are getting ready to move." He didn't say it right out, but it was pretty clear what he meant, and it set the tone for today's fight. Danzo gave a rolling nod from his own seat, which was off to the side on the Hokage's right. "Quite," he said. "We've been noticing more activity from Suna for a few weeks now. This is nothing new." One person's eyebrows went up as if to ask if he knew anything new to add to what they already knew. "They are planning to invade during the Chunin exams." Hiruzen blinked twice as he thought about what was being said. For a moment, he narrowed his eyes at his 2 guests, but then he relaxed his face and raised one brow in silence. "I just met the children of the Case Cage." Even though he tried his best, the shinobi of Suna, with the help of the council, are planning to use the 3rd event as a cover. I knew that the invasion was going to happen and was just waiting to see if Rasa would stop it. So far, he hasn't been able to do it. "And how did you find out about this, Genin Uzumaki?" "I have friends outside of our walls who heard about a helper who was going to help them with this project." They have been convinced to change their minds about what they want to do against Konohagakure. The fact that they pulled their support should have been enough to convince Suna not to try, since he would lose most of his shinobi forces and Sunagakure would become, at best, a small village. And you probably don't know why they've kept going, do you? People who live in the sand are usually more concerned with staying alive than anything else, and I find it hard to believe that even in their situation, they would take such a risk when the odds are against them. Of course, Hokage-sama. Naruto gave a shallow bow that almost seemed mocking, but Hiruzen was more happy that the young man was saying something in his presence than irritated by any perceived insult. They're betting on the Kage's youngest son. Both leaders understood right away, so there was no need to say anything else. Sabaku no Gara, murmured Danzo. It makes sense that they would trust the Ikibi to kill us, he snorted. But they should know better. Ikibi is very strong compared to regular shinobi and even other biju when it is in its home territory of the sands of Kase no Kuni. However, when it is outside of its domain, it is much weaker. Jiraiya could probably fight it off, and Naruto has been taught how to use the Kyuubi's chakra. Mito, Naruto said almost before he realized what he was saying. Danzo looked at him with raised eyebrows, but Naruto explained a bit more. The Kyuubi is called Mito and likes to take the form of her first jailer. There are some small differences between the two, but it's easy to see how similar they are. When the old Sarutobi started to ask his own question, Naruto just pointed to the seal over his heart that was almost fused with his other seal. Hiruzen nodded to show that he understood. Naruto was the Jinchuriki, but some people knew that two people had the seal. Very well, Danzo said. Naruto has been trained to use Mito's chakra, and that should be enough to beat the Ikibi. Suna is crazy if they think they can do it. They might not win, but there will still be a lot of collateral damage in any battle with a Jinchuriki, especially one as unstable as Sabaku no Gara. If we can get rid of that threat for good, we'll need to find a way to limit that damage. Naruto looked at his wounds and said, I might be able to help there. He then asked, what does Konoha think about having a second Biju? Hiruzen looked at him like he had grown a second head, but Danzo just grinned from his seat to the side. Oh, Naruto would be a great replacement when it was time.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.